I've actually started a minute early. Did I post the event? I did.
Yeah,
I did post the
yeah.
event. That's
I feel
fine.
like you did.
I did post the
Yeah.
event. Hello, everyone. We've already asked how are we to each other. So if I were to do it again, it would appear superficial, and that is not what we're like here on the Dyer's Cast.
That's
So
a barefaced lie.
it is a barefaced lie. Welcome one and all to the Dyer's Cast. This time on Performance Check, we alternate. If you've been watching my channel, watching Dyer's Cast, and thinking I want more episodes of Dyer's Cast, go for the RDM because half of the episodes are over on his channel. So that's just a heads up. Today we are blessed with not one, but two very special guests. We have Jeff Doty, who is becoming somewhat of a regular guest star. And we also have Taylor, who is also been on this once, I think. I don't remember. Say hi, guys.
Hi.
Hi, guys.
Someone does it every time. It's just the default joke.
I did it last
like a
time, so
running
I have to
channel
make
joke
sure
now, I
not to
think.
do it again. Like, it would be too much if I did it 2 times in a row. So I had to let Taylor go for it.
And to let Taylor take the easy shot. Good job. Right. Today we're going to be talking about some games. 3 games of which... No, 2 games of which we've all been involved in. So that we'll be able to talk about that in some detail. Lloyd, let's start with you because you did a stream the other day regarding splitting the party, a somewhat faux pas topic when it comes to your standard D&D, but you were talking about it and I was wondering if you could enlighten us about what you were talking about.
Yes, you should do it whenever you can, I think. It's real effective. You can cover lots of ground really quickly. Traditionally, I think coming from old school RPGs, where it was very much, I wouldn't say adversarial, but it was like, it's you, the party, and you're working together not to get killed. And there's all these traps and all these things that are like made so that there's a good balance. And if you're all there, you have a chance to succeed. And if you're not all there, then you probably don't have a chance to succeed. And that's why you shouldn't split the party, I think. And that's where that maxim comes from. But that's not the games that I play or that you play or that anyone that I can see in Abtab plays. And even, beyond, I don't think many people play that kind of game in the online community. I feel like that's the game that most people actually play. Like most home groups of D&D probably play that game, the standard kick indoors, get some treasure, kill a skeleton sort of game. But it's not really what we tend to do in the online community. So I think we've been doing it a lot recently in our games. It's happened quite a few times in Vampire. But I feel like it's also happened in other games that we've played recently. We did it with the Star Wars game that we played a lot. You guys were basically never together. And I used it as a device in Against the Shadow for the Siege as well to give a bigger impression of the battle, that it's everywhere instead of just in one place where the party is. So, yeah, I think it's like a really useful tool, and you should do it more often if you can.
I think you're right when saying essentially don't split the party means don't split up because we might get into a fight. It's essentially what it means, and more swords pointed in one direction in a closed group is better than divided. Yeah. Divided we fall, as they say. Do you guys have any opinions on this, Jeff?
I mean, yeah, I basically agree. I think like the don't split the party thing is very much a relic of like a different play style, where it's like you're in a dungeon. There's going to be like an ogre and 5 goblins in the next room, no matter who's there. And there's not going to be any talking. There's not going to be questions. It's just going to be, there's bad guys. We're going to kill them. But it's like, that's not really how it works anymore in a lot of games. It's very much like, well, if we meet somebody, first we're going to talk to them. We're going to see if we can come to some agreement. And if not, then we're going to find some other way to go about it. Maybe that's a fight. Maybe it's not. And like the whole like balance and like challenge rating aspect of it like really doesn't apply to any of the games that we play in, at least. So it's like, to me, it's kind of like an outdated thing. Especially in games like Vampire, like I think we've been apart more than we've been together in a lot of the sessions. And being a modern game helps that a lot, where we can just send each other texts in the game and things like that. But yeah, I basically agree with everything Lloyd said.
I think it's kind of a video game mentality. Like you have your cast of so many characters and you need to have all those slots filled, and you travel as a group and you can fast travel places, and you have to have somebody in the healer role and somebody is the rogue and somebody is the tank. And that's kind of what a lot of your standard D&D revolves around is that you have a party, and they must be a party, and they must travel together. And some of these kind of more gritty games and the modern ones, you are moving away from that, and I really like it.
I like it too, but the one thing that we try and stay on track with the Dice Cast, at least in most recordings, we do come off the rails every now and then, but we have to try and remember at the same time that this is a game, and sticking together is tactically advantageous. It is tactically advantageous to bring a healer with you, to have someone who can fire spells at long range, as well as it is to someone to soak damage in the front lines. Where do you draw the line?
I actually used a hard party splitting mechanic yesterday in Saga, which was like this tunnel you had to crawl through that made it very difficult for you guys all to be in the same place. And then there was a combat, and then it was like, oh fuck. And it was just because I was exploring this idea of like splitting the party, and I was like, it would be interesting if they got in a fight and they couldn't be in the same room together. I don't know about drawing the line. I feel like it's a bad idea, I think, generally speaking, if you're playing a game that's like very combat heavy. So like I play in a Roman campaign, and in that I would never really consider splitting the party at all, because we're like a group of soldiers and we fight better together, and it's a combat game, it's a war game, so I would never really consider it there. But in games, and I think particularly I'm playing Blades in the Dark later, and I'm playing like Vampire and stuff regularly, those games which are kind of more modern and more kind of like not investigation-y, but like sandboxy, I guess. It makes more sense to cover more ground more quickly.
It is exhausting as well running it, because instead of having one scene that you're focusing on and describing, you're focusing on potentially 4 scenes that you're describing and keeping track of the action in each one. So it is a pretty full on to do, especially if it's an energetic session like with Vampire or with the Lord of the Rings stuff or Saga. Like all of them those 3 have been very, very pacey games. It hasn't really been much splitting the party and then them talking to different people. They're split because there's a massive amount of conflict and action happening at the same time. So as good as it is, I think it should be treated sparingly, 1, for your own health, and 2, because I think you get those sort of like keystone sessions where there's like everything going on at once, and it goes absolutely crazy. You obviously need to take time to catch a breather.
Yeah, and I think it's important too to note that like if the party at some point, if they're just like split and they're going to be split for like a long time, at some point you just have to ask, maybe it would just be better to run like separate sessions. Like, okay, we're just going to handle this group because like your guys are going to be gone from each other for like a week. So it's like, you're not going to interact at all. You're not going to talk. So like, why go back and forth between everybody if you could focus it? Like if you're split that much and that heavily for that long, it might just be more effective to do that.
Any further thoughts, Taylor?
Yeah, I think it's knowing the type of game, but it's also up to the GM as well to not just immediately go, ooh, they're split, now's my chance. That's a very adversarial type of GMing, is to just throw whatever at the players when they're weakest. And sometimes that can work, but if you do that constantly, every time they split, then they're just never going to split the party. And they're going to be like, well, nope, strength in numbers. I'm not going anywhere.
I'll have to remember that for next time. No, I'm kidding. I'd never do that.
You did do that.
Kind of 100%.
Yeah, I did. Oh well. So let's talk about the games that we've been playing in the most recent games, and then we will jump to the questions. Now, Lloyd, I know we were discussing last time we finished that I don't know whether we be briefer about talking about our games, because sometimes we end up answering a lot of the stuff that we have in the questions, or do we just go for it?
I thought we had considered doing questions first.
Okay. Should we try doing questions first?
Well, because what happens is we start talking about our games and the questions build up and we don't answer any questions during the game talk. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think this way we can like smash the questions, and at the end we can be like, oh, also we played these games. That makes any sense.
That's a great idea.
Let's
Forgive
try the
us.
format once and see if it works. It might be a terrible disaster.
You can use the games to answer the questions.
Okay.
You might have good examples.
All right. Yeah, sure. Let's just talk about format in the show. That's my fault. I should have asked you beforehand. Okay, well, in that case, then, for those of you that don't know, we usually post a thing the day of the Dice Cast in the Absolute Tabletop group over on Facebook. Great place to hang out, talk about games. Go over there and join it. It's fantastic. There we post saying, ask us anything about role-playing games and we'll talk about it. So in future, if you want to leave us a question, leave it there. Or you can go to the live chat while we're live. So if you have any further questions to ask, now's the time to start putting them into the chat. So, do we have the questions up? I need to quickly grab them.
I do.
Go.
Yep.
How important is session 0?
Okay, I'll do this first. So I think it depends because there was a long time when I was running games where I didn't do session zeros. I'd say the term session 0 at least is fairly new to me. But to be honest with you, I think I was doing session zeros anyway without realizing it, because in person games, I'd be hanging out with people and talking to them. Oh, I'm going to run this game. What's it going to be about? Oh, well, I suppose it's going to be about this. If you were to play it, what kind of character you're going to be? So I kind of was doing session zeros, even though I didn't know that that's what they were. So I'd say they're pretty important. I'd say it's good to give your players a what's the word? Like a pitch. You pitch them, like, because if they're not going to like what you're going to do, then I think they're really important. What about you guys?
For me, it kind of depends on what you count as being a session 0 and what the game specifically is. So, like for a one shot, I would never do a session 0 ever. I think the interest post is going to cover like 90% of it, and like the messenger chat and event page will cover the extra 10%. And a session 0 is kind of a waste of a time. For campaigns, it's like a little bit more important, I think, because you have more time to work with all the elements that you talk about. So that's kind of a difference there that I need to draw. I think they're like pretty important. I think I'm a little less like crucial on them than I think some groups are. Some groups are like, no, you have to absolutely have one. It helps too that a lot of the campaigns that I'm in are with like 4 out of like the same 8 people that I play with game after game. So like we kind of all know what we're getting into with each other anyways. So they are important, but less important depending on a couple things.
I think that's a really good point. Is session 0 is for setting kind of your ground rules and your basis and what to expect. And the more you've played with people, the less you need a session 0. And the more you can just kind of manage it from the event page or a group chat or whatever. But if you're playing with new people or someone that you're not really sure how they're going to gel, then you do, I think, really want a session 0 in that situation, because it's important for everyone to come into the game with the same expectations. And you'll get more out of that from a hangout session or an in-person session than you will from a chat if you're new to it.
Yep, I think it's good to like set certain things like scope of the campaign, tone of the campaign, stuff like that. I would never do them for a one-shot either. I don't think it's necessary. But for a campaign, I think there's good stuff to be taken from it. You can also kind of like try and gauge as a GM what the players are into. You can mention parts of your setting and then see which bits they like are enthused about, and that's the bits that you should focus on. If you're planning on running something sandboxy or something, I don't know how essential they are. And like has been mentioned, like we play in basically all of the games together. So at this stage, it's like you guys basically know what the story is when I run a game or when Rob runs a game or whatever it is. But with new people, you should do it.
Yeah, definitely. But that said, we did start Jade Horde without a session 0, which is another game we need to talk about, actually, Lloyd, at the end of this.
Yeah, Jesus. Yep.
Because that was... I'm losing track. There's too much going on. But I think that hopefully answers the question, at least. So the next question is from Mike Lasham, who says, how would you handle sudden stealth kills, i.e. your player sneaks up behind someone and kills them? Now, I had a little bit of an idea about this, that if you'd like to humor me, I think if you were going to try and do like an assassin-based game, I thought what would be really cool is if you got like a kind of like a hybrid of the crit table that Lloyd uses in a lot of his games, where you can creep up on them and do certain things depending on what you roll on a D100 table. Or maybe that's too many options for. That's probably too many options for, for just sneaking up behind someone. There's only so much you can do, but do you know what I mean? Maybe something with a little more effect, or go to the 3.5 days. And the assassin class was essentially, if you concentrated on someone for 3 rounds, you could go up to someone and attack them. If your attack landed, then you would have to do a save or die, fortitude save. If you failed, you would be killed instantly by the assassin. So that's another way of doing it if you want to be hardcore. Those are my thoughts anyway.
I think it depends, because I think if it's, I think that's a good idea. I think the idea of a stealth kill is like problematic, because it's fine if it's like a guard in a camp or something. That doesn't really bother me too much. Like, oh yeah, it's just some dude. You can sneak up. If you're the rogue, you can sneak up and kill somebody without hassle. But if it's like the main boss, if it's Uthal Coldbrander and you guys sneak up behind him and then like attack him, like you're not going to kill him, you know? Like it would be so disappointing for the campaign if that happened. I think so. It's a tricky one. I think for like dweebs and minions, you can kill them with a stealth attack and it makes your players feel rad. But I also think you have to be careful with like, but I kind of like in my head tier my enemies the way that Fantasy Flight does, where there's minions, rivals, and nemesis, which is a really good way in my head of looking at them. So like, you're never going to one-shot kill a nemesis. It's just not going to happen, right? But you could do it to a minion or potentially a rival as well.
Well, that's Vagnar's plan. Fucked. Thank you.
I really like that kind of system, Lloyd, where you tier them, because it lends itself really well to a narrative gameplay, even when you are pretty hardcore on a lot of rules and you're very strict about, hit die, and you have different long rest and short rest rules. But it's a different feel when you're like, yeah, no, you can do that. You can absolutely go up and shank this guy and he's just dead. I don't need you to roll and see if you got 11 out of his 13 hit points. And that keeps the game flowing, and it helps it not just get bogged down.
Yeah, I think it's also important occasionally to like let the players feel rad, because I tend to run games where players get pissed on just repeatedly. And like, like there's not too much victory to be had. So I think like if you can, like the minion thing works well, but also like it works well in this situation where it's like, okay, you snuck up on this person and then you just do the thing. You just do the thing you want to do because you're a badass, And then when the sideline punch comes, it doesn't feel so bad because you've done something cool.
Yeah, I think there's kind of a range of things that you can do with it too, depending on what the focus of the game is. Like if the game is like if you just happen to be sneaking up on a guard in like a game that's not about like assassination, then yeah, maybe you just say, yeah, this guy's just a whatever, a dweeb, and you just sneak up on him and kill him. But if the game is like literally focused around assassination, I think there's kind of some room to give it some play. Like even using something like dueling rules kind of altered a little bit, where instead of like 2 people fighting, it's like one person trying to sneak and the other person trying to be aware. So like even taking in different subsystems like dueling rules or like skill challenge rules or things like that, to make it more of an experience rather than just like, oh, I rolled well on one single stealth check, so now I just and he's dead. Especially if they are slightly more important, where it kind of matters for them to be alive or dead.
You beat me to it with the skill challenge. That was another suggestion. I thought like you can take it narratively. So you have to basically creep through this fortress and you can take out people and hide in the shadows in whatever way you wish, but it's going to be a skill challenge. You need this many successes, go, and then you narrate what it happens. There's something I stole from Matt Click, actually. He ran it was ages and ages ago. I think it was a game that Lloyd was in. I think it was the first game I ever saw Lloyd in. It was an Umber Cloak game, which is Matt's spy/assassins guild in Aeronoth. And I stole that for a Court of Whispers game, which is my spy assassins guild game in my setting, where I had the players introduced taking people out and finishing previous jobs to give them a sort of a cool entrance or whatever. So I think those are a few fairly decent suggestions, unless anyone else has anything else. No, we are done. Next question. Okay, I'll read the next question.
I was waiting for you to. Yeah, I gotta hear what I'm like. The suspense.
I was talking. It's fine. Taylor Jeffrey has a question. which we're going to read, and then we're going to make Taylor answer first. What do you do if a player says they aren't enjoying their character and want to bring a new one to a campaign? How much leeway do you give players who cancel or need to reschedule? At what point is it unfair to the rest of the group to keep switching things around? Taylor.
I'll just answer the first part, I think, to start with. No, that's a genuine question for me, honestly. Like, if you have a player who has a character that's either mechanically or narratively not fun for them, what do you do? Like, do you just let that character exit stage right? Do you kill them off? Do you let them just bring in someone new? Do you try and work with them to fix it?
So I actually had this happen to me. Not even as a GM, but I actually did this as a player in a campaign that I'm playing in Jeremy Lilly's Ashes of Heaven campaign. I was playing a character, and it just became like more and more obvious that like there's no reason that this person would stay with this party and do these things. Like there was too much else that was too important to them to like justify them being there. So I literally just messaged Jeremy. I was like, hey, I don't think it makes sense for this character to be here. Like he's not really that enjoyable because I feel like I can't do it authentically. Can I just play somebody else? He was like, yep. We'll just have him go off to do those things that he wants to do instead, and we'll roll up a new character. And that was it. Like I gave it a couple sessions, like 2 or 3, I think it was, before I brought it up. But yeah, I don't see a problem if it's just not working and there's like good reasons. Just write him out and have him play a new character.
Yep. I think you can also like offer them, if it's a mechanical problem, you can just be like, hey, listen, here's the story. I don't think this character is mechanically useful. I don't like it or whatever. And then you can work with them to just have them change their character class or whatever it is, you know, instead of like removing the character. The other option is if it's a narrative thing, like I don't see the problem either, like with a character simply leaving. Like if there's a reason that they have to leave the group or like they don't fit anymore, that's fine. If you just don't want to play the character anymore, I would like try and find a reason to, or get yourself killed. I guess is another option. Or like talk to the GM about like an exit, you know?
I've got to agree. I mean, I don't think there's much more I can add there. To be honest, like if you don't find the character interesting, then perhaps you might find the character interesting in terms of making an exit for them. You could do something interesting because you have a finality to it, perhaps. Whether that be a death or whether that be them leaving for another reason. And I suppose if they leave and they're alive, there's always the chance to bring them back if needs be. And that's an ally for the future of the game, I suppose. But I think we did very well. You guys did very well answering that question. So onwards to the next one.
There's also a question
Do we
about
want to do
canceling
the
stuff.
second part?
Yeah.
Yeah, the second part of that.
Oh yeah.
How much leeway do you give players who cancel or need to reschedule? At what point is it unfair to the rest of the group to keep switching things around?
It depends.
I mean, for me, it depends on the person, the situation, like the severity of the reason. Like there's kind of a lot of factors into it. Like if they can't make it because something terrible happened in their life, obviously, you know, I'm going to give that much more time than just like, oops, I forgot I slept or I slept through it or whatever. It's like, and eventually, probably after a couple sessions, like 2 or 3, you just have to say like, okay, like enough is enough. You either need to be able to commit to this or you need to be able to not, because it's not working out like this.
Yep, it's like a waste of everybody's time, potentially, you know. If there are genuine reasons, then like that's fine. But if like you are consistently flaking on the game and you have a reputation for that, then you'll get a reputation for that, and then no one will want to play with you. So yeah, I don't know. It depends on so many variables, I guess. But overall, like if it's somebody who I think is like good and is consistent, but then suddenly can't come because something happens, obviously that's fine. If it's somebody who's just lazy or non-committal, then that's not.
And like many questions on the Dyer's cast, depends. Depends. We should just write depends on the screen and that'll be the show. But no, yeah, absolutely. It depends on the reason. Yeah, it depends on the reason. But that is a good question. It is something that you need to consider carefully indeed. We have let me quickly read this because there's something beneath that question. Is that a question?
No, it's not a question.
Okay. So the next question is Philip Maddy says, building your setting. 1, how far would you let someone take your setting and run with it before it is no longer your setting? 2, what's your process for fleshing out a setting? 3, what do you think is the best way to share your setting? Send a link to a 1,000-page document full of random strings of thoughts, share a 1-page summary, or just play as many games as you can. Well, that one, number 3, I can answer that right away. But we'll go with number 1. So how far would you let someone take your setting and run with it before it's no longer your setting?
So we talked lots about this before, Rob, about like pillars of the setting, or like 5 pillars of what makes a setting a setting.
Yeah.
And I think that if you are not adhering to at least 3 of those, then you're not running the setting. You know, like if you're running Iskloft and it's this high magic adventure with 20-minute rests and, you know, like whatever, sorcerers, and it's not really Iskloft anymore. You're not doing it right. It doesn't fit. So I don't know. I don't know how much it actually is your setting once you sell it, or once you like have it out there. People can take what they want from that document and do what they want with it, you know. But if they want to call it Iskloft, then they have to do certain things, or I'll be on your ass and giving out to you. Process fleshing out a setting is just run 100 million games, and the answer number 3 is just run 100 million games. Just run all the games.
There are some settings that are designed for you to run with it and make changes. So Faerun, things like that, you can jump in and use as much or less magic as you want. Some of them are there to do that. And then there's some that are more about the identity and the reason you play. For example, Iskloft is because you want a specific change in the types of games that you run. And if you want to run a very heavily gritty Viking setting, then you play Iskloft. And if you don't want to do that, then play something else, I suppose.
I like Viking.
Viking, yeah, I said Viking. I don't know why Viking, but we're gonna add that. We're gonna add that to the setting, Lloyd. That's gonna be your 5e setting.
Pillar number 1: be quite Viking.
Be quite Viking.
Yeah, I think Rob makes a good point there of kind of separating like what you would call like the very narrow settings versus just like the broad bucket kitchen sink settings. If it's like, it's a lot easier to take a setting that has everything and just be able to do whatever you want with it. Like if there's all these different races and all these different classes and magic, and sometimes there's not magic, some places there are, like at that point, like you can just basically do whatever you want in the setting, and it's hard to like argue that you've gone against it because there's not really a formal identity to the entire thing. But the more narrow a setting is, the more specific it is to a very specific set of rules and a certain tone. I think that's when you kind of have to draw the line and say, hey, no, you've gone outside of what this setting is explicitly for, and is very clearly about. So like, why are you still calling it that? And I don't necessarily understand why you would still want to call it that. Like if you've made that many changes to a setting, like if I ran a game like where there's like a little bit of raiding, but there's also dragonborn sorcerers and all that, like I wouldn't want to call that Iskloft anyways, because like that's clearly like not the same thing.
But some people want to run Iskloft with dragonborn. We've seen that happen before.
Well, they can't.
And it's more of a piss take, let's be honest. Which is a waste of everyone's time, I think. Like, you're just wasting your time. Stop wasting your time. Yeah. What about you, Taylor? What do you think?
So I think you guys are hitting the nail on the head. And to get a sense of what a setting is, one, you need to try and play in it before you run it, if possible. And if there is, a 1-page summary that hits the highlights and says, these are the pillars of the setting, this is what it's all about, that can be really helpful for someone who's coming in and wanting to run Iskloft, who doesn't know a lot about it, who wants to run 9 Kingdoms and goes, okay, well, what's in it? I don't know. But the answer is clearly just play a bunch of games and then run a bunch of games.
Sure is. Lloyd, you read a question.
Okay. How do you deal with a loner character who likes to play on that fact by dragging out any decision with the I just stay in the corner and not saying anything cliche? That person is removed from my game almost immediately. is my answer. I won't tolerate that. It's just not okay, and I won't have it. You should remove that person from your game immediately, Brian, because it's lame and dumb.
Yep. My answer is first leave them behind in character. If that doesn't shape them up, leave them behind out of character. Like that's all there is to it. Like if they're not going to participate, then you move on. And you move on as a party. And if he doesn't follow along and get into it, then you say, okay, well, why are you in this game if you're not going to play? Like I just don't see any reason to like.
Yeah.
There's a difference between like being like a loner character, like in that stereotypical sense, and like actually not participating and actually being a total loner. It's like, why would they bring you along if you literally don't contribute anything to the group and participate in any way? You wouldn't. You would just leave. So
I have a solution if you don't want to take the radical, just kick them out of the game. So this actually goes back to what we were talking about last time. We were talking about having party conflicts and essentially ensuring that no matter what the character is like, as long as they share the same goals as the party, a la Wagner, Phelan, whatever from Saga, then that is a way. Because like, let's face it, like in the wrong situation, Wagner is totally the edgelord. I'm a grumpy rogue that wants to sit in the corner and sulk at everyone. Like there's a good chance that can happen, you know. But it's ensuring that they have like a uniting goal, and I think as long as that character has that, then there's really no logic for them to doing that. And if they continue to do that and defy the logic of the situation that character's in, then that's when it becomes the problem, and that's when I'd suggest having a chat with them and being like, look, come on. Like, you're here to play. You're not here to sit. I mean, if you want to sit in the corner on your own, you can do that right now. There's a corner. Off you go. Just like explaining to him like that, we need to align our goals somewhat to make sure that it's enjoyable for everyone. Yeah, and then in the logic of the actual party, why would you bring someone who isn't going to help you? So yeah.
Yeah, I agree that the more middling response is to help the player find a reason for their character to be invested in what the party's doing, and help the party maybe find a reason to be invested in this character. And if both of them can't get on board with that, then you may have to take the more radical solution and be like, well, if you cannot make yourself get this character invested in the campaign, then you shouldn't be here.
Yeah, I think so. And I think it's like, it's not even your job to make people like interested in the game, like as the GM. Like, they should be there with enthusiasm. If they're not enthused enough, then fuck up. Find people who are. Burn every bridge.
Close every door to me. We have more questions.
It's Kaya's Corner.
Kaya's Corner. We still need a jingle. Kaya says, if you have an investigation element to a game, have you ever given out clues during a life and death combat and have the players picked up on them? Is it possible to run an investigation game and play an intelligence other than your own? Doesn't the success of an investigation game depend upon players, not characters, working out a mystery? And I suppose that also buys into the whole, do you let your character or the player solve the puzzle in the dungeon, you know? What are your thoughts on this?
I'm always first, so I'm going to wait.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think once you decide that you're going to run a like a puzzle or a riddle or something like that, you just have to understand that you're tapping into the player's minds just as much as the character's minds. I think that's just kind of unavoidable to a good investigation game. For one, it's just very difficult if you're like playing a character with like, okay, well, I'm terrible at riddles, but I have like a 20 intelligence and a 20 wisdom. Like, so my character clearly would just know, but like that's not fun to play out. Of just like, oh, I roll a check, a riddles check or a intelligence check. I got a 20. What is it? But it's also not interesting to like know it, but be like, oh, well, my character's too stupid to know it, even though I know it. So, and just like sit there and hide it. Like, I don't think there's really any good solution, so I just let the players use their brains for it.
Yeah, it's the thing that I find difficult about investigation games, to be honest, because it's not like if it's the characters making those connections, then it's a case of rolling dice and like using their skills. But then the actual investigation is them rolling their skills and you telling them the answers, which is not so interesting.
Yeah, I actually attempted something like this in Vampire last session. There was obviously a lot going on, and I think it might have been lost in the madness and the confusion, but there was a slight clue dropped in the middle of a very heated moment involving the Weatherman, which is a character I'm sure we'll discuss in a bit. But so I've tried it, but at the same time, players are programmed that when it's fight time, they're focusing on fighting, and you've got to really draw attention to it. I think like sometimes you've got to like really, really spell it out, especially if it's like something that's integral to your game. If it is a purely investigation game, then it obviously is integral to the game. I prefer investigation elements, which is kind of me, I guess, being maybe a bit lazy when it comes to that. I don't know if it entirely appeals to the games that I want to run. I like mystery and I like intrigue, but I'm not going to try and think of ways to like completely outsmart them, because if I manage that, then they're never going to know. And the only knowable information is included in the game. So if they don't know that and they miss that, then it's not part of the game. If that makes any sense whatsoever, guys.
Yeah, it does. And I think too, like kind of going in with what you were saying about like being lost in the shuffle of it, like during the high tension moments, like I think that's kind of enhanced too, of like where you get like punished for being like in character, so to speak. So it's like if you drop a super important detail in the game in the middle of like a frantic battle, like in Vampire, like with the Weatherman, like, we've busted into this like crazy place. There's alarms and explosions going off everywhere. Like one of our friends is like brutally tortured and we're like fighting people who are like way above our pay grade. And yet somehow in the midst of all that, we're going to have like the foresight to be like, oh, that word he said was awful interesting then. Like there's just no way. You'd be in such a state of like adrenaline rush and shock and like pure like autopilot instinct that how could you even notice things like that in character?
Yeah, and it's just there's just a tiny hint. There was just it wasn't even integral to what was actually going on at the time. More something about the setting and the world, I suppose. But there you go. You can just throw. I know that there have been times in basically every game that I've run, there have been threads that I've dangled that have never been tugged upon. And I think that's the key, especially with Sandbox. Like that's the best you can hope for, really, isn't it? Like that they get at least some of them, and you sort of just
quite a fine line with the Sandbox, that because I think often when people first start those kind of games, they're like, here are 700 hooks, here's fucking a million things you can do, and then the players are like overwhelmed with too many things. Do you know what I mean? So you have to be quite careful in like placing the right number, kind of.
Or they're just like, let's go and fight Alduin now.
Yeah, exactly.
Hopefully that's answered Kai's question a little bit. At least some lively discussion about that. Always great to visit Kai's corner. Let's see. We have a question from. It is, yes. Jeff Doty says.
So this is just something I've been thinking about. Does the creator of a setting have sole decisions on how that setting should be run? For example, not that he would actually do this, but if Lloyd decided that he was going to run Iskloft with high fantasy and dragonborn wizards and things like that, would we as players in the setting have the right to say, no, that's not what Iskloft is? Or because Lloyd is the creator, would he be able to say, yes, this is what Iskloft is, and nothing you say gets to change that because it's my setting? So kind of talking about it from the other angle of like, if somebody else runs Iskloft and they put in Dragonborn, we can say that's not Iskloft. But what if Lloyd ran Iskloft with Dragonborn and wizards? could we still say that it's not Iskloft because it's his setting?
Who are you and what have you done with Lloyd? What my first question would be. But I'm interested, Lloyd. You made a good point in this as well.
Yeah, I had mentioned that it's kind of like George Lucas in the prequels, and how like a creator can, I think, lose vision of what their setting is. And I think like it depends on how well established the setting is. So if it's brand new and it's like you're still figuring out and you're still throwing shit at the wall and seeing which bits stick, then you can change things as much as you want. But I think when you've run, like with Iskloft, I've run 100 plus games easily. Like at that stage, it's pretty well established what the setting is. And I think at that stage, the players do have a right to say that doesn't really make sense. That doesn't fit. Like if I'm playing in Middle Earth, I'm more than willing to like hassle GMs who bring in things that don't make sense, or Westeros or other settings they know really well. I would be like, that doesn't feel right to me. It doesn't make sense to me. And I think if I started doing that with Iskloft, it would be fair as well. People to come in and be like, hey, listen, like that ain't right. You shouldn't do that. It's not how the setting should work. I don't think I would do it, but maybe 50 years from now, if Iskloft is still around, then maybe I'll look back and put in loads of special effects all over the place and be like, this is what I want instead, like who knows?
It's interesting because with the analogy of it with films, okay, so like Star Wars, like Lord of the Rings, I mean that's fandom. Fandom is people saying this is what would happen in this situation, or this is Star Wars and this isn't Star Wars. I mean, we talk about what's Star Wars and what's Lord of the Rings all the time, don't we? So to be honest, I think it comes to the decision of once something is released into the world, is it yours? Is your setting yours once you've put pen to paper, published a setting or whatever, sent it out into the world? People have paid money for it, I suppose it's really down to the individual, isn't it? And it's down to whether they want to align their vision with what the creator intended, at least at the time of creation, or going their own way with it, I suppose. I mean, what would you think Tolkien would say about Against the Shadow, Lloyd?
God, I don't know. He might hate it. I don't know that he'd hate it. I think he would. I think that Peter Jackson would like it more than Tolkien would.
Yeah, he'd love it.
Because I think like and this is going to sound sacrilegious, but my preferred medium for Lord of the Rings is the films. I think they're fucking amazing, really practical. And I prefer their portrayal of that world than Tolkien's. Oh, sorry to all the people who are watching.
No, I'm with you, man. I'm with you, totally.
So I think Tolkien might see it and be like, it's barbaric and it's, simplified, and where are the songs, where are the poems? I mean, we actually have that, so maybe it gets to shadows. Where's Tom Bombadil? Where are the hobbits? I don't know. But it is a tricky one. I think everyone, like, when you look at a setting that you like with me in Star Wars, I don't run Star Wars the way that, like, I would run unsurprisingly, a darker or grittier Star Wars than like
people
you might
swear
see
in your Star Wars. Yes. That's what I noticed, and I was like, "Oh,
they do, yeah." And that's kind of generally going to be the case with me. I'll take the things that I like about a setting, and then I'll put it into a world that feels more real to me. Like if I ran Mass Effect, it would be a similar sort of thing. It would be darker and shittier, and but the spirit is still there of the setting, if that makes sense. Like I still think I'm like hitting the pillars or whatever,
Yeah, all comes back to the pillars at the end of the day. Slowing down my voice as I open Facebook to get to the next question, which is having maps versus narrative, abstract direction, pros and cons. It's a good question.
So,
I'll go ahead.
Yeah, I was gonna say I basically my preference is I like maps on a big scale, so like world maps, region maps, things like that. But I don't like battle maps. Like once you start getting down to the like fine grain level of like the actual players and the places that they are, I think it starts to become, for me, more of a hassle. And it takes me out of character. I feel like it's harder for me to like stay into the flow of the game if I'm also having to manage, well, okay, I'm not just going to move over to this guy and do this, but I'm going to move 5 squares to the right and then 1 square up to do this action. Like it can kind of take me out if you get too down to scale with it. So I like big maps, but I don't like zoomed in maps. When they get too specific, it makes it tougher for me.
I mean, I always leave the lines of even my, I try and always make sure I have a map of some kind before I start a campaign, at least for fantasy. But I like to leave the edges blurry, and that's more because I like to leave room for myself to expand. I may never ever reach the edge of the map, but at least I'm comfortable knowing that there is kind of like room for interpretation. I suppose not just for me, but for players as well. They think, oh, I really want to have like a secret little outpost that I can make somewhere. I'm like, yeah, you can put it over there, and that's where it will be. Like there isn't really much room for discussion. It just happens. As long as you have like a logic to where everything is, and you could, as long as you, as the GM, know where they're traveling to and from, etc., and what they might encounter, and sort of what the journey conditions would be like, and you're confident you can talk about that to make up, playing travel, then I think that's fine. And I think in terms of zoomed in and it comes to combat, I do still like a grid if I'm in person. If I'm online, I don't, because it slows it down. Like if you're just sat at home playing on a grid, then I'll be happy. I'll be very happy to do that. I just don't think it complements the way that I play when I'm running online. So that would be my opinion on that.
Yep. Maps useful for tactical combat, but I also agree that they take you out of it. I can't imagine myself as a miniature or as a token on the screen. It takes me out of it. But they are useful for like big battles, and they're useful if you're playing kick down the door dungeon D&D.
Absolutely. And that leads us to the end of our Facebook questions. And now we direct our attention to the live chat. We have quite a few people watching today. So thank you ever so much for joining us here on the Diacast. Always nice to have people adding to the discussion. And the first question is right at the top. And it's from Cloud Spirit, who asks the exact same question. So I'm guessing Cloud Spirit is that person from the group. So never mind. Hopefully we answered that to your liking. Do we actually have any questions? Oh, we do. T the Writer, hey man, says, I just had a session a few days ago. There were 13 magic items in my dungeon, and the adventurers were so cowardly and suspicious of traps. They played for 5.5 hours and walked away with 115 gold pieces, an ever-burning torch. Thoughts on cowardly players and dungeons? I can't give them anything. So, okay, we can relate this to an experience that happened in a game yesterday. Lloyd was talking earlier about a situation that he put our players into in Saga, which is Iskloft 5e Viking setting. And my character basically stumbled into this tomb, and bodies were laid out, and they were bedecked in armor. They had jewelry. They had finely crafted weapons, and they had almost the glow of life about them, Lloyd described. And instantly, I get the cowardly feeling. Everyone gets that. Every player who has played at least one session of D&D or whatever role-playing game will get that, because they'll know something's going to happen. Now, at the end of the day, T, you reward risk. If people are going to risk themselves, that's when they get the reward. If they aren't willing to risk anything, then why do they deserve any of those fine 13 magical items you've left for them? I think that's the only way that people will learn. If they don't try anything, they're not going to achieve anything. Lloyd did a wonderful thing where he waited a very long time for anything to happen within there. So it got us paranoid. It got us wondering whether anything was going to go and happen. The setting isn't heavily magical, so it seemed like a good bet, but at the same time, we had weird experiences only moments before, and yeah, so it was a really, really nicely balanced paranoia fest. So I would just answer that question by saying answer, risk with reward.
Yep, that covers it, I think. Like, if your players are going to be cowardly, they don't get the thing. Like, if you walk into a dungeon and you're like, "Ooh, it's scary in here," and then you leave, like, you're not going to get anything. You got to risk it for the biscuit,
Yeah, and I mean, to be fair, like that kind of makes sense. Like if you were gonna go down into some weird place that you know has all these monsters and traps in it, it's like I could maybe try to get that magical sword on that strange pedestal, but it might kill me. Like, why wouldn't you? Like, is it really worth losing an arm or perhaps more just to get that random item? So, like, in some sense, I get it, like why they wouldn't do it. Um, at the same time, I think what Rob said basically covers it. Is you got to make sure one that at least some amount of the time it's worth it to try, um, and two, just have them know that if they don't do it, then they don't get those things. Like you don't have to give it to them, and you don't have like if they don't want to do that, then find something that they will do, and kind of build up. I think it's something that you can do as well. Is like if they're not willing to take that level of risk, give them a smaller risk for a smaller reward first as like a training step. It's like, okay, you guys can actually do this. If you try things, you can get things, and then you can kind of work back up to the 13 magical items in the sprawling dungeon kind of thing. It might just be too much.
That's a really good point, Jeff. That there is a logic to their action. Obviously, they are frightened for a reason. They are going into a dark place underground filled with monsters and traps. So, logically, yeah, absolutely, they should be scared. Yeah, that's just step one of the situation, though. I like that, though. Give them sort of like training wheels, like very, very small rewards for small risks, and build it up that way, perhaps.
There is a discussion going on about romance in Vampire.
Romance in Vampire. Okay.
Yep.
There's a discussion
shipping?
just with everyone, of like that this party splitting thing usually leads to death, but it could also lead to romance. And then there was a discussion: is it going to be Tess and Toph, or is it going to be Tess and Siegfried, or is it going to be Tess and Danica? If any of those things are going to happen, to which.
Well, from running the game, I mean, I'm not gonna push. If the players want that to happen, I won't stop them. You know, the subject matter is very, very sensual. That is very much part of the vampiric culture. Is that there is a sensuality and there is a romance behind it. Whether that's something the players want to do is entirely up to them. I will say though that I completely agree with the separation thing. There is generally a development of relationships between characters that are left together. Not necessarily romantic, but in terms of just role playing anyway, like in that Saga game, which we keep coming back to. Vagnar and Tess, mixing the games. Vagnar and Havisla famously absolutely despise each other, but were forced to work together in that particular situation. Because of that, the relationship changed. For good and for ill in a lot of ways. So yeah, I think it's good. And if you want that to be in your game, you should at least hint to it. You don't want sterility and weirdness where no one likes anyone in your games.
And we talked about that before, like how sexless games are and how that's like the main drive of most humans. But it's just like, I guess, not something that like I'm particularly interested in exploring in my role-playing games.
Right.
You know, it's not why there are games for that, you know, but it's not really, and not necessarily even creepy games. Like there's just games that are about relationships and like stuff like that. But it's just not really what I want. I want the struggle of survival. I want pulling teeth from corpses you've killed so that you can buy enough flax to make yourself a shirt. You know, like I want that kind of misery.
Yeah, I guess it's like why you choose what video games you play as well. Like I don't play like dating sims. But then again, I suppose I like games like Mass Effect where you develop relationships with characters. So I don't know. I like that element. I mean, I don't explore the romance side too much because I agree with you. Like, and we've talked about this before, but like it could get weird. I've never had it go weird in my games, but I can see that it could easily go that way. So I just leave it down to the players. If the players want to do it, then I'm not going to stop them. But, you know, otherwise, fade to black. Whatever. Sorry, Jeff, I cut you off.
No, that sums up most of what I was going to say anyways. Like, especially, like, it's tough, I think, in games, to, like, especially between players to, like, push for that kind of thing. Like, because it's kind of something you don't want to, like, it's awkward and strange to like spring that on them, like both in character and out of character, of just like making a move on somebody else's character, like that can very easily, like it could become something that's very cool in the campaign and interesting, and like a relationship that could develop could be very interesting to explore in that sort of campaign. But it kind of comes down to an out of character risk versus reward thing. Like, is it really worth doing that in the game if they're not ready for it? Especially, it could very easily just be like, whoa, what the heck is happening here? This is not the game I signed up for, and now I'm like being hit on by another character that's also a player. It can get strange quickly. So it's like, if you can work it out, then cool. But yeah, you got to be careful.
Absolutely. Although I do find it hilarious that people are shipping characters in a game we play. That's just really strange to me. And also, why do all the ships just include Tess? Where are the ships for Faig and Toph? I mean, come on. That's my question. But yeah, interesting thoughts. And like I say, I won't stop them if that's what they want, but I won't make them if they don't. Because that's weird. Are there other questions?
So no labeled questions, I will say. So obviously people didn't read the top of the chat.
Are there actual questions?
I mean, it's very hard to see without the...
I do see a non-marked question. It's way at the bottom, so we may have skipped one. But rule of cool versus rules as written, which takes precedence, and when do you do one or the other?
I would say that if you're not playing rules as written or intended, then you're not really playing the game. There are times when rule of cool, it makes sense, but I really hate it. I hate the idea that it's like the better option. That it's like, oh, it's way cooler to like let your players do all this crazy shit. Like I roll a 20 so I can jump to the moon. Like, no, that's just why even use rules if you're gonna, like
jump to the moon.
I've seen people talk like, if I get a natural 20, I can do anything, and like, I don't like that at all. So I would say, I don't know about rules as written. Rules as intended is my sort of baseline. Like I read a rule and I make sense of it. And like, there's a little bit of wiggle room in there, but there are still rules to the game. Otherwise, just, I don't know, play Fate.
Play Fate. Little dig there. I guess I'm with you because, like, to me, the rules are the physics, the rules are the logic. And when you start messing around with them, then you start messing around with the logic of the game. There will be times when a fight's wrapping up, for example, and then I know that basically the enemies are done for. I can say you rout them and you kill them in whatever way you wish, or there'll be times where I'll be like, okay, just tell me what happens, because the outcome has basically already been decided by rules as written. So weirdly, the rules as written informs the rule of cool for me, I suppose. I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, for me, it's always a matter of cool being tempered by realism and like the setting pillars. Like, rule of cool is going to vary like massively across settings. It's like I would say that there is some element of like rule of cool in Iscloft, but that's like, I'd like to use my attack to suck out this person's eye instead of hitting it with my sword. But like, and we are kind of going outside of the rules for that, but it's within the setting, and it's still something that's like physically reasonable. Like, he's not asking to like flap his arms and fly through the air. But like, oops, I rolled a 20.
There are mechanics for those exceptions that are kind of made up on the spot. So like, I want to do that. Okay, that's an improvised attack, and or an unarmed attack or whatever. Like there's still rules happening there.
Yeah, so it's like, I'm fine with like making rules that fit outside of the regular rules. Like if you're trying to do something that's not covered by a regular action, or just like, okay, well that's cool and it makes sense that you would try, so let's make something up. But like, if it's just like, oh, I want to do 7 backflips and then stab this guy in the back, like it's just nah. Like that's just cool, has to fit the setting and it has to make sense.
Okay, we have one last question in the chat, and then we're going to start. We'll just debrief by talking about our games. We've obviously talked about Saga a little bit, but we do have other games to discuss. And the final question is from our good friend T the Writer, who says, question, which would you prefer? Oh, I like these ones. Which would you prefer? A shield that can't be damaged in any way or bent, a dagger that does 1 damage but never misses, or goggles that can see through doors but nothing else?
Shield.
Shield.
I don't know. I was actually thinking goggles. It's like a shield that can't be bent could or messed with in any way could be a hindrance. Like, what are you supposed to do with that? And like when we were crawling through that tunnel in Saga, you have to leave it behind. There's just no way you could have taken it with you. Like, that could be a liability.
I also think
And a shield
that-
can still be bypassed.
yeah,
Just because it's a shield doesn't mean you're never going to get hit.
you'd want the ability to be very good at a shield as well. The dagger could be amazing if you were also a poisoner, right? All you need to do is 1 point of damage to deliver the dose of the 10d6 worm poison you have, you know? So that could be pretty damn useful.
The
Good point.
doors are a bit situational. Like,
Yeah.
always good to be able to see through a door, but you can also listen under a door or look beneath the door. Maybe like there are, I don't know. Like to me, the shield went to my mind because of the shield being indestructible. My brain just went to Captain America. I was like, that's great. I want to be like Captain America, but obviously you can't do the cool bouncy thing. Captain America is very good with angles. Have you ever noticed that?
Unbelievably good with angles. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
That's his real superpower.
It is. He's a
Expert mathematician.
His knowledge of geometry and physics is unrivaled.
Okay, thanks for questions. I'm sure there'll be more. We're going to talk about our games. We go in chronological order.
So chronological order would be
Jade Horde, I think.
Jade Horde. Jeff, do you want to? What we do is we'll all discuss one game and do the synopsis of it before we talk about it. So give us a synopsis of what happened within Jade Horde session 2.
So a lot. Well, not a lot, but it felt like a lot. So we had left off the last session. We had taken back this fort, Oxbow Keep, which the orcs had taken and ransacked and basically left a sign of war at. We rested there for the night before setting off east, I think, if my directions are being remembered correctly. We came across an orc in the middle of the wide open, endless plains, severely wounded, his mount nearly dead, dying actually. And he warned us about a sky terror which had attacked him and his mount. There was then a following discussion about whether or not that we should help this thing. Diego, my character, ended up agreeing to prevent the mount from dying, but nothing more, which was not a very satisfying solution for this orc, who was now like, well, I'm just going to wait here now for this thing to come kill us anyways. And before we could make any progress with that, the Sky Terror actually came, and it was a giant fucking owlbear with wings and was terrifying. A battle ensued. Matt's character, Baltazar, literally had his arm torn off by the owlbear before we were eventually able to take it down, where we were then captured by orcs who brought us to their town, told us they were going to keep us until another orc showed up. There was some negotiations, which mostly involved us being coerced into doing things under penalty of severe maiming or death. And then eventually, we all had to brand ourselves with this symbol before we could be allowed to head back towards our human lands to show that we had been to show the threat of the orcish invasion. And we all almost died because instead of communicating with his words like a sensible human, Rob's character summoned a holy spirit sword out of nowhere with no explanation, and a battle almost happened, which was then stopped, and we left eventually to head back to the oh god, I can't remember the place. Our human wall place. Last Light, yep. And that was the session, more or less.
So, my character just had to eat shit. To explain Vasco in this setting, it's humans and orcs. There has been alluded to there are other species maybe, but right now it's focusing on a conflict between the indigenous orc tribes that have been there since time immemorial and the human empire known as the Nation that are basically conquistadors striking forward and trying to conquer. And that's where my character Vasco is from. He is born of nobility. He is xenophobic. He is arrogant. and quite an unlikable character. And he has his reasons for being like that. He was born into that society. I mean, we talked about this last time. What Dan Carlin says: if you're born into that society, you will grow up with those values. And that's essentially what he was having to deal with. And he actually had to let his pride take the fall rather than let everyone and him get slaughtered. Which really, really, I was so angry in that game. Like, as a player, I was just like, I was shaking in a good way. I obviously knew, this is a game. Like, I'm not taking this personally, but I was like, fuck.
Yeah, it was just incredibly aggravating and frustrating at every turn. Like, once we had been taken to that orc village, just like, nope, you're going to do this, and it goes against like everything about your character's values and like everything about what they want. But it's like that, or they kill you. So it's like, do you like make a scene and like die in a blaze of not even like, because it wouldn't even be a glorious death, it would be a brutal one. But do you like stand up and just say like no, or you let it happen? And like, we really didn't have, like, obviously we had a choice technically speaking, but we didn't really have a choice. It was like, except that we're going to be like branded by this orcish heathen magic or die. And it's like, when as a player you're just forced to just shut up and take it. Like, it's one of the most frustrating things in a good way. Like Rob said, like, I loved it, it was great, but oh my god, it was so infuriating.
It's a tricky one on my end because it felt like a hard railroad. It's like, this is what's happening, this is the thing that's going to happen, and if you don't go along with it, you might get killed, or you really will get killed. And I felt kind of gross about it, but I think it was like important for like the longer term campaign. I think it'll make a lot more sense, and it was like an important event that happened, but also it felt like I didn't give you guys many options, and that like kind of like made me feel gross about it.
I mean, I didn't feel like we were railroaded, to be honest. I understood it as most situations in the games you run, Lloyd, which is if you're outnumbered, invariably you're in trouble. And I'm glad we met who we met. I'm glad we met Blackfeather, the Orcish emissary, because now my character has a face to pin to everything that he despises, for good and ill. It's given us trajectory. It's given us motivation, all the motivation,
yes,
in the world, if they didn't have it already. And also, I really like the setting. Like, I know it's very bare bones, and I know that it's kind of open, but it's you doing high fantasy, kind of high gritty fantasy, with an owlbear, that comes out of the sky but rips off one of our players' arms. It's D&D on extreme mode.
Yeah,
I can't help but love it. Yeah, I didn't feel like that, man. I didn't feel railroaded.
Good.
Yep, I would agree. Like, I think there's an important distinction between like a situation being like railroady and like a GM being railroady. Like, it would have been like, it was only a railroad because we were in a bad situation. Like, when you're in that kind of situation, there's only so much that you can do. Like, when you're literally in the camp of the enemy and there's 100 of them and 4 of you, like, there's just nothing you can do about that. Like, and it makes sense in character why your options would be so limited. Like, when I think of like railroading as like a bad GM thing, I think of it like more of like, there's no reason why we couldn't go do other things, but somehow the gods always seem to move everything so that we must follow only one certain path.
Right.
And like, it felt like we very much got ourselves into that situation of our own volition. We could have killed that orc and been done with it and left, but instead we waited around and tried to help him. The other orcs came, we could have tried to fight them, but we didn't. We let them take us in to stop a scene. And like, we had choices all along the way up until the situation where it made sense that there was no choices.
We also have no shortage of options in terms of our characters as well. Unlike most Jarl games, my character can summon a sword from nowhere. He had no weapons, but he was able to call a weapon to him and he was ready to fight. And all right, he wouldn't have had a shield, but he still would have been a dangerous foe to fight with his smite and stuff. He's a paladin.
2 of the characters are casters, right? So even without weapons, like
Casters,
the cleric and the warlock are just as dangerous.
So even being deprived of a weapon,
like,
in
no,
setting...
my mace is gone. My least effective weapon is not here. I still have all my other ridiculous shenanigans.
Yeah. But overall, really good, and I want us to rally a force and try and trick him. That's the plan, because that he wants us to march an army out into the wilderness where they'll get slaughtered. So I want to buy into that and try and fool him somehow. Oh, and there was also really cool warlock stuff for Matt's character, who is a hexblade and who spoke to the smoking mirror, a half human, half panther deity, asking him to go and retrieve a trifling thing, a ruby within a tomb that's surrounded by snake people. And get his arm back. And I love those kinds of quests. I absolutely love it when we all have to band together to help one of the party out to achieve something, and then they get something back for it or whatever. So I really like that that's on the cards as well. So that was Jade Horde, and for those of you interested, go check it out, because it's, like I said, hardcore D&D on YLDM. Next, chronologically, is Vampire. Yes.
Yep.
So
do you want to do
I ran a game. I ran a game on Saturday.
do it.
If we don't
Yes,
want to, we don't want to talk too much about that. But I ran a game in Iskloft that Lloyd played in, among some other great players: Nico, Tyler Hurst, and Nicholas. I don't know how to say his last name. Jacquet. Which one of the interesting things that I think happened in that game is that there was, with the exception of Lloyd's character, there was no combat in the game. The premise was basically there's this very scary dude who came out of nowhere and has gathered all this power, and he wants more. So he marched to the town where the players were at, serving the Jarl there, or at least had been wintering there and kind of had some obligation to him. He said, "You guys are going to leave, and we're going to take this village, or we are going to kill all of you." And some of the people obviously weren't very happy with that compromise, considering it was not much of a compromise on the enemy's side. And Lloyd's character, who was super devout, holy man, Odinic berserker, challenged the other guy to a home gang, a duel, which would settle the whole thing. Which Lloyd got pretty messed up, though he did get a couple of good hits back the other way as well. But I thought it was interesting. I liked the session overall, but I felt weird that I was running a playtest game essentially, because other than you and Nico, Tyler and Nicholas had never played in Iskloft, so they were trying out all these brand new character options for the very first time, and they basically didn't get to use any of their stuff. So I guess just kind of bringing that up, how do you guys feel about games, especially playtest games, that end up where players find other ways around the encounters that are meant to test things? How did you feel about the game as a whole, and also that specific aspect of it? Especially you, Lloyd, because you were kind of the cause of it, which made sense in character, and it was awesome. It was super badass, but
yeah, it's a tricky one. I guess don't apologize for when I play a character and it's disruptive. So I just didn't see a way that this Odin worshipping zealot would let this happen. He would have to do something. And he's also, a berserker, which means that historically he wins duels. He wins, he's never come up against somebody who he hasn't defeated in a home gang. And he's okay, well, I've got Odin on my side. Of course I'll win. And it felt really thematic. But I know what the issue is. That encounter was just me and the bad guy, and so everybody else had to just watch. And that was I didn't think about it like that when I challenged, but then when I realized at the end of the game, actually all that happened was I fought a guy. So I probably wouldn't do it again. Well, I don't know if I would or not. It's possible.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's tough because it's I totally agree that it, in every aspect of it in character, made sense. So to not do it would kind of been a weird meta thing. My character would do this and it makes sense, but I'm going to choose not to because I want to let the playtest combat happen as it's supposed to, so other people can do their things. It's a weird.
The only thing I'll say is that, admittedly, it's all playtest material, but you're still running a game. You still want to run the game that you've come up with and that you would like to see play out, and you let your players do what they wanted. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that. There will always be another time to run a huge combat in Iscloft. Violence is one of the pillars of the setting.
Number 2.
Horrendous violence of every kind. But that's what I would say. There's always another time, but there is only one opportunity to see that particular circumstance happen in that way. So I think it's nothing but a good thing.
I got to do some to explore some of the nasty witch magic too, which was fun.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, we had like this witch appear who like had this like desiccated, like rotting rabbit hanging from her staff, and she like used it to cast a spell, like chewed up some of the dead flesh, and then like made the other guy eat it, and then like drew symbols on him in blood and stuff. It was great. It was really like ritualistic and gross. And then we played against Shadow.
Vampire. Against Shadow, I think. Yeah, you do Vampire then, Lloyd, and I'll do against Shadow.
Oh Jesus! We had followed our friend Tess, who had been captured by Winchester, who are an organization of hunters. Not just vampire hunters, I think, is what Hunter the Reckoning or the Vigil. I don't know which one. They're like devout sort of supernatural hunters, I guess is what you would call them. We only know them as vampire hunters in game. They had taken our friend Tess, and that was not okay with us. And so myself and Siegfried, Dunica and Siegfried, went and were going to try and spring her from there and like free her. And at the end of the previous session, Dunica had already gone into the facility. We had killed the guards outside. And he had made his way into the facility, set off a couple of bombs, and was now like waiting hidden. And so we started the session again. Dunica like continued his rampage of destroying things inside, and then Siegfried like froze and wasn't sure what to do, and then like left the scene and was like unwilling to go and help him. So like my character Dunica was inside there with like a regiment of vampire hunters on his own, basically. And that was great. I thought really interesting that Siegfried like was, that was the personal horror for me, which really like showed. So Dunica like went in there and was being a vampire, like a real vampire, like scaring people and like killing people. Toph, who had been thrown from a building in the previous episode, regained his consciousness in this like scary ass lab. Where the worst fucker in human existence in all the span of the galaxy, Mr. Gisborne, was waiting for him. He gave another patronizing as fuck speech, and then made Toph sign a contract, just like that apparently includes us, even though we weren't present. And then Toph came and tried to help. So Toph speeds his way through the city. He's got vampiric celerity, so he can move at like insane speeds. He finds Siegfried outside, covered in blood. Siegfried had like frenzied and killed 6 of these Winchester guards. He had like lost his mind somewhat and become a beast from, I guess, the shame and the fear and whatever else. So the two of them start making their way inside. At this stage, Dunica has fought a captain, I guess, or like a sergeant of the Winchester organization. I think that's the guy who once tried to get Tess in on the top floor of the hospital. I think that's who that was. Dunica brutally killed him and then put on his clothes and then climbed down into the lift shaft. He then got to do like the raddest corridor fight, little tiny hallway, and there was like 10 Winchester guards with guns, and there was just violence. In the meantime, Tess is being tortured horribly. Firstly, they pour some holy water on her, which like burns her badly, and then this little fat creep, the weatherman, comes, who's like maybe some sort of psychic investigator or something like that, and he starts to like use psychic torture on Tess and manages to pull Dunica's name from a hat. Siegfried and Toph have like found a way into the room where Tess is. They're like smashed through this glass and they're like falling down this thing into the room where all of the baddies are. While Dunica is like in the corridor and he has been shot to pieces. He's killed a lot of healable. He's been shot to pieces. He spent all of his willpower and then turned into a nightmare. So he frenzied. Also, Tess frenzied. So there were 3 frenzies in that game. I don't think Toph did, right? He managed to avoid it. So there was these 3 frenzied vampires just running around and just like actual nightmare fuel and killing everything. And in the frenzy, Donika's like avatar of shadow and death like managed to kill this Stazer thing, which we thought was a human commander, but actually turned out to be a fetch, like a strange thing that had come through the hedge. Whether that's actually him or if it's like a copy of him or something, that remains to be seen. But in the end, all of the things were killed. Every fucking human in that facility was brutally murdered, torn to pieces, or devoured. At the very, very end, we made our way outside, and the sheriff, the very scary sheriff, smacked Tess in the head and knocked her unconscious. And then the last scene was Donika like chasing this poor retreating Winchester man and then devouring him. I think that's all the stuff that happened.
One important side note regarding the contract: Toph literally read 0 words of it.
Didn't read it.
0 words. Mr. Gizmo's like, "You need to sign this." He was like, "Okay, here you go." So we literally have no idea what's on that. It could be literally anything.
So to be clear about that reasoning, their reasoning anyway, I know you disagree, and I know I tease you about taking the side of the camera over you, like, and that's just teasing. The logic behind that is usually when a vampire sires another vampire, it is their responsibility. Therefore, if they're ever bound by blood to do something, that means that everyone that they've sired is also bound into that same contract. Now, Toph isn't your sire, but he is the one that was put in responsibility of you, thus meaning essentially that. There's a few takeaways for me from that game. One, that I absolutely adored that everyone really embraced the chaotic nature of the session. It was just nuts. I loved that Siegfried ran away. I was, one, surprised by that, very surprised. I absolutely loved that he did that. I loved Taylor just being amazing with like the whole torture scene. Obviously, it's not a pleasant thing to talk about or to deal with, but she did it amazingly and showed both courage and fear, which, as I said at the end of the game, isn't what a lot of people would do in role playing that. They would just act the hard man or the hard woman. They wouldn't show the other side of it. So seeing lots of different aspects of the characters we haven't fully seen, including 3 frenzies, which was pretty impressive. And I just dug the corridor fight because that for me was like what I mean. I pitched this game saying vampire versus SWAT, and when we did a few test combats, remember when we were trying to learn the system?
Yeah.
It was vampires versus. So I was like, finally, we get this rad moment where you're taking on like 10 people with assault rifles. Yeah. What was your takeaway, Jeff?
Yeah, I agree with one of the things that you said, and one of the things that was kind of the highlight of the of that specific session for me was that like we saw like different sides of like all of like each character had like some sort of interaction that was both like a little bit outside what people expected, but still like very much fit within their like personality. So it's like it was kind of interesting to see that line of like we're changing up a little bit, but it still like feels fundamentally like them. One other thing side to that I wanted to highlight was how much I loved. Like I think I said it after the game recording had ended, so on the air I'll give credit where it's due one more time and say the scene transitions and like timing changes in that game were phenomenal. Like it always felt like it was switching at just the right moment for like great drama and great story, and like the transitions between them were very cinematic. Like it felt like the kind of thing that would happen in a very tense part of like an action horror movie. Like it was very well traversed the whole splitting the party thing that we opened the whole thing up with.
I thank you for that, man. But at the end of the day, I wouldn't be able to do that if I didn't have like great things and great decisions that you guys were making to jump between, you know. But I appreciate you saying that, man. The other thing that I kind of this is one thing that I wanted to get over, which I don't think I did in the game. My intention with that session was also to give you a bit more information about Winchester, at least how they operate.
We know what they look like on the inside.
Sorry,
We know what their insides look like.
you know that's true. That is very true. What I'd hoped to show, and you know, if this didn't come across, then that's absolutely fine, was that there were particular levels of skill amongst them. Some of them are just soldiers, elite soldiers, perhaps, but soldiers regardless. And then there are some that possess true faith, which are slightly up in the ranks, which is actually part of the hunter powers from the World of Darkness Hunter game, where hunters can make water into holy water, which usually wouldn't work, but it does. Crucifixes now ward vampires and make them and repel them and stuff. They didn't have those, but did you get sort of like the fact that there was a hierarchy?
Sure. I fought that one guy, and he was as quick as me, and that to me immediately made me realize that this is like in my mind, like that's a hunter. These guys are soldiers. I couldn't kill 10 hunters. No fucking way. I don't think. You know, it was in my mind for sure. When I was in the corridor, I was thinking these must be like line infantry, just like, you know, normal dudes who like work for the organization and who have been given incendiary ammo. But the dude I fought 1v1, that was like close. And I feel like that was someone who has something magical about them.
Yeah, it definitely came across for me too, in the scene with the room where like we have like this weatherman guy who has some sort of powers. We don't really know exactly what that was, but he can like at least see into Tess's mind and like mess with her head. And has some kind of weird ability. And then the fact that like Stazer, who seemed to be kind of in charge of the whole operation, was like literally a creature. Like he was not a human. He was like another thing entirely. Which we don't know exactly how that came to be, if that was known within their organization or not. But at the very least, they have, like, they use powers that are not just human powers. They have other creatures and other strange things within them that they use to help them in the fight.
Okay, well, at least that came across, and I'm glad then. I obviously didn't, I underestimated what you guys are picking up on in that then. That's cool. There was one thing I was going to say, but oh yes, the investigation thing. The point in the combat where there was a bit of information dropped. The weatherman was about to say something that he belonged to before his throat was ripped out and something. But you guys are all like, just wanted to get out of there, and I was like, you know what, that's fine.
Well, I mean, like at that point, two of the four of us were literally in frenzy at the time, and like the other two were like frantic. Like I was very badly hurt by Stazer. Donica had literally was frenzied and like massively wounded. So it was just like whatever you have to say isn't as important as us not dying. Especially when you're taking into account frenzy. So it was just like, sorry, I'm sure what you were going to say was very cool and interesting, both in and out of character, but there's just no way we're going to be like, oh, you know what? Stop the fighting. Let's hear this man out.
I totally agree. And even at the time, I was like, no, he's just had his throat ripped out. Whatever, doesn't matter. Maybe you'll find out. Maybe you won't. We'll see. Good. Well, I'm glad that it came across well. It was very fun to run, but like we've been saying, exhausting to jump between one and the other. And that was obviously mirrored with Against the Shadow, which was Lloyd's Middle Earth game. We mentioned last episode that we were going to begin besieging the fabled mountain fortress of Gundabad. I absolutely adored this session. This was not our first mass combat, but it was the biggest mass combat that we've ever been involved in. We've been in one more huge battle, at least. And it was wonderful. It felt I felt nervous throughout the game, and I felt nervous because we had spent a number of sessions, a lot of sessions, building up to and preparing for this battle, uniting as many forces of Middle Earth as we could to try and take the mountain. And even with that behind us, it still seems like an insurmountable task. We face the Black Numenorian, a villain that has been a thorn in our sides for a number of times, and each time he comes back because yes, we kill him, he's a servant of Sauron, and like servants of Sauron's do, they come back. At least the magical kind, and you know what I mean, like the wraiths and stuff. So he's back in the picture, which is terrifying. And I don't know, I felt that battle had a very, very steep learning curve. Essentially, the session was us the night before, which was great because we had like a role-playing moment, and it made us even more nervous because we were discussing, you know, different tactics. How are we actually going to achieve this? Do we hold back? Do we starve and drought them out, or do we go in guns blazing? Do we hit them with a force that is greater than the force against us? And in the end, we sort of did a hybrid of all these different things to try and make the to make an effective strategy to try and take the mountain. Sending the majority of the force towards the Dragon Gate, the main gate in front of the mountain, while sending a small contingent of elves, dwarves, to mine a secret entrance in, a bit bigger, so more forces can get in, along with our friend Beregond, one of the player characters, who was going in to try and rescue prisoners from Gundabad. This is the reason why we at least started considering going up against the mountain. The battle consisted of essentially Faroth. He gave a speech, which I really like doing. I've not done a battle scene speech in a long time, and I really enjoyed that I got to do that. Faroth sort of stepping up to his position, and then charging an army at the defenses. I liked that we were an attacking force in Middle Earth. Usually the good guys are always on the defense because it's very thematic, you know, it's the defense of everything that is good and pure against like an invading darkness, whereas this, we were trying to take back something. And yeah, the learning curve was essentially we can't keep fighting the way we usually fight because Faroth goes in guns blazing, trying to hack through as many people as possible, and by the third round he was nearly on his ass. And it was then that the Black Numenorian was descending upon him. And thankfully, the rest of the forces did their job and routed his forces back into the mountain temporarily. And I like that this is a huge event. I like that this Gundabad thing is going to occur across multiple sessions. So, Lloyd, how did it feel to get at least the very beginning of the Battle of Gundabad underway?
It was really stressful to run that session. It's running a battle of that size is like really a lot to keep in mind. The initiative list was enormous, and there was like lots of things going on. It was basically 3 separate conflicts going on, plus there were layer actions at the top of the round, which would be your troops, their troops, like missile fire, you know, siege fire, stuff like that. I should have split that up, I think, which I will do if we ever do something like this again. I will split it up further. So rather than it being at the top of the round, it'll be like artillery and then archers and then whatever else. It was good. I really liked it. I think it went well. But I also couldn't prep it as much as I would have liked for something like this because I didn't know what your strategy was going to be. I wasn't sure if you're going to go for an auto attack, if you're going to try and starve them out, or whatever the tactic was going to be. But overall, I think it was good. It was really fun. I think the learning curve was deliberate, and I'm glad that it was as punishing because trying to assault a castle where you're outnumbered just seems like a crazy idea, you know. So I think maybe after the dead are counted, it might be a case of rethinking that strategy, and seeing what is to be done next time. But I really like that I didn't want it to be 3 actual real life in life months of sessions and several months in-game sessions, and then it to be a session where you go and take Gundabad. It should be a really big deal, you know. It's something that people will write about in Middle Earth afterwards, sort of thing.
It certainly felt like a big deal. Like I said, I was nervous going into it, genuinely nervous, because I was like, we put a lot of time and effort into this. If we fuck this up, then it's going to be really bad. But at the same time, if we do fuck this up, I would not hesitate to understand that, yeah, we lost, you know, because that's part of the package. One One thing that I thought you were going to do, which you didn't, in terms of the initiative list, and I think we did do it against the Shadow before. I think you put numbers next to the different initiative things. But I know that it was such a big list anyway that that's going to be really hard to do.
But that's a decent technique, I think. Like if you have split battles, which the idea was here that we'd have 3 separate combats, is that you can put a number next to. So I would have put a 1 next to where you and board were, and all the enemies there. So I would know just by looking that, oh, this is the bridge, and this is the tunnel, and this is the cavalry battle or whatever. And that is quite useful as a tool. I just forgot it there. I also didn't spread the enemies out very well. Like I put 2 enemies in the tunnel with Caius, but he brought 100 elves with him into the tunnel, which I wasn't expecting, you know. And then I put all the enemies on the bridge because I figured if you were going to attack anywhere, it would be on the bridge. There was only 2 statted enemies at the cavalry battle, you know. So I would have to rethink it, but it's always a learning experience, I guess.
There's one thing that I'd like to mention because it will bring Jeff into the conversation. Jeff, I know at least watched part of that battle. But also, Jeff had a greater hand in the Battle of Gundabad, i.e. his player character that was involved in a one-shot about Gundabad that Lloyd ran like a week previously, I believe it was.
Yeah.
Didn't like Faroth, did he, Jeff?
Yeah, I mean, so for a little bit of the preface, we basically played a one-shot beforehand where Thranduil had basically sent a crack team, scout party, and just get in, do as much damage as you can, know that you're probably going to die, but that what you're doing is for the good of everybody and it's going to help. So we played a level 10 one-shot, which is pretty up there for Middle-earth and for Lloyd games. So we were all just crazy badasses with all these magical heirloom weapons, and Marquise had a legendary artifact, all this crazy stuff. So we get in there and go nuts. But part of it is my character got basically mind controlled by one of the enemy people for a part of the session, and the session ends with basically everybody in that game dying, or so we thought they had died. But it turns out that my character in that an elf archer Edrahil probably died, but it seems he was brought back by some evil magics. Yeah. And Lloyd asked me before the game of hey, do you still have that character sheet? And I was just oh god, that's not going to be good, because he is one nasty fellow. But you guys managed to get very, very lucky and got the crit that disabled his shooting arm. So good on you for that, because that would have been a lot more pain than you guys took already. It
was the crit for the people that were our line of archers, wasn't it, that got him? Yep. I was like, oh my god, thank God.
In their game, they managed to banish a particularly powerful enemy from Gundabad, or kick it out of there. And so when the Black Numenorian came to take power and to look over the place and ensure that it's running properly, he found this basically freshly dead elven hero. And was oh, great, and just rubbed his hands together, and then went through the necessary necromantic rituals to bring him back as a useful weapon, which I feel it's there's not as much overt magic in the movies or in even in the books or whatever, but I found in the Shadow of War and of Mordor games, you see some really cool orcs that have weird magical abilities. You see that what are they called in the first one, the Tower of Sauron and those baddies. I feel that sort of stuff, I like that, and I think it should be more prevalent. So that's kind of, I figured the Black Numenorian has magical powers because he's a direct servant of Sauron, and Sauron has magic. So yeah, it felt evil, it felt shitty, it felt awful that you had to fight that once glorious hero, and also I really love just being so fucking cocky with that Black Numenorian, just watching the battlefield and not even getting involved, because I knew that would drive you all mental, which was fun.
Kind of glad he didn't get involved, because if he got involved with me when he was approaching, then that would probably been at the end of Faroth. The Edrahil had basically killed him by the time he got to him. Thankfully, the Wanderer gets revenge when struck with a melee attack. So I was come on, hit me if you want. So thankfully that worked out for him in the end. It was just an epic session, but on the edge of my seat the whole time, and I was very nervous about it, and it's still not over.
Nope.
And we're not going to be able to really heal, which is a problem. One last question before we move on, then, Lloyd, because we should probably speed things up. But just out of curiosity, are you gonna make it? Is there going to be any way that we're going to be able to retrieve any health to make us last longer in the fight, or are we literally going to be on what we're on? And I don't mind either way. I'm just curious.
It depends on the actions. Like, you cannot continue now. Like, you'll need to take time to rest. So I think a short rest in Middle Earth is 8 hours anyway, and you need a long rest. It has to be in a steading, which is definitely not where you are. Not a steading, a sanctuary. So I think it's possible, and I think the elves will help you with that. There are scholar/healer archetypes that you can play in this setting, so I think it's possible that they will be able to heal you. But you won't get the long rest stuff back. You know, if you use something that's once per long rest, you won't get that stuff back. But I also think that that's limited in how much healing can be done, because they also need to take a long rest, which they won't be able to do, you know?
Yeah, I was very careful not to go straight in and use royalty revealed right at the beginning of the fight, because I wouldn't be able to do it for the rest of the battle, which would be a pain. So Against the Shadow, go check it out over on YardDM. And finally, we talked about it a lot, but let's talk about Saga. Jeff, is back round to you to say what happened in it.
Yeah, so we ended the last session. You guys finally, after every part of me trying not to, convinced me to follow that damn map to that strange marked spot where supposedly there was going to be a bunch of treasure. I didn't want to do it, but you guys convinced me. We ended the session. We had come across where this mark supposedly was on that map. We saw all these strange symbols that, like, not even our Sather, who was supposed to know that kind of stuff, knew what they were entirely. And this, like, eerie song being sung. So we start this session that we just played right there, where one of the new characters that checks, who came into the campaign that session, we got to see him a little bit, a berserker who was basically being held in this place by magic. And then this terrifying creature that we would come to know, it was an Alfir, or the elves in Iskloft, which are not like elves in Middle Earth or in D&D. They are terrifying evil monsters with, like, near godlike power. And he basically dazzled us in this crazy trance that everybody but Havisla was in. And he went across to each of us, trying to make basically, like, Faustian bargains with us, essentially, of just like, you do something for me and I'll give you incredible power. That's all it takes. So Havisla, who we found out was pregnant, he just wanted the kid. She obviously did not want to give it up, so she declined. He then went to Vagnar, basically saying, when she has the kid, you just have to take it, mark it with the symbol, and leave it in some woods, and all the things about your life that make it hell for you will all go away. Which Vagnar tentatively accepted. Is at least interested. He then went to Phelim with a similar offer of, like, whoever your next child is, you just have to name them this specific name. Once you do, you'll be like the greatest conqueror in all of history. And he pretty steadily accepted, because he is not of the same religious background that the other characters are, so he has, like, less overt reason to decline. And then I think the biggest surprise for me and probably everyone else is that this thing then went to Sigrid, offering basically, hey, your friends are going to become awful strong once they do certain things. Maybe it's in your best interest to be the hero and kill them, and if you do, I'll give you your arm back, which she had lost in the previous sessions. And Sigrid, who is supposed to be, like, the most honorable and noble and just to the gods and all of us, of all of us, actually agreed with this thing, got her arm back immediately, and was given a special knife that, when the time was right, will supposedly immediately kill Phelim and Vagnar. We had this super awesome scene with that thing where we all got, like, our each individual, like, trials and deals, which was very cool. This thing then disappeared, we still wanted the supposed treasure that was here, so we went looking for it. We found a tunnel in the cave, and after recruiting Chex's character, Sigverker, to our band, after a super awesome introduction by his character and request, it was just the best. We sent a couple people, Wagner and Havisla specifically, through the tunnel, along with some pirates that were part of our crew. They found these men who were, they looked dead, but they also didn't look dead. They were just lying there. They had been dressed as if they were dead, but they still looked very much alive, just not moving. But they had like incredible gear, like golden rings, like finely crafted swords and armor, which in Iscloft might as well be the equivalent of like finding like a dragon's hoard of magical items. Like that's a very nice gear that we found. We eventually decide that we're going to take it, despite resistance from some of the people in the crew. Then Havisla leaves the tunnel with one of the items, this like weird cursed staff in the center of the room, starts like screaming thief loud enough that basically anybody within like 50 miles could hear it. And then the dead people decided that they were not dead and got up, which in Iscloft is exceptionally scary. They're not just 5e zombies, they're like terrifying monster creatures. And there was basically a fight where most of us were on the other side of a tunnel that we couldn't cross in time to help, and they just had to figure out what to do. They ran after a super awesome sequence with Havisla blessing this symbol and giving it to Wagner, who then like presented it to like banish these creatures back. We just ran, literally ran all the way back to our ship and sailed it out to the ocean before being like, okay, we can rest and take it easy now for a while, and decided that we were going to go hire Gunlander mercenaries.
Well explained. Very succinctly. My takeaways from this session are the following. Chex is amazing.
Oh my god, so good.
I mean,
just the best.
As soon as he's in, there's a mood, there's a certain level of presence that he brings with it, and I know it's effortless. I know he doesn't try. It just happens. It's a mixture of that wonderful accent, his knowledge of the setting. He's an original Iskov player, and the character is a storyteller. Like the berserker is much more than just a barbarian with rage in Iskloft, and I love that he was showing that to us. I loved that his talk of his cloak and how if Phelan were to fall in battle, he would take his finger bone from his weapon, sword hand or whatever. So that was incredible. My other takeaway is that we've had a number of sessions to get to know the characters and the character dynamics. And then Lloyd, you come along with a badass voice, I might add. Some excellent voice effects going on in the latest game of Saga. Comes along with this little offer, I say little, offers and drops it. And now these established characters are given directions, they're given decisions. I can only speak to my own character decision, which is Lloyd has presented my character Wagner with the potential of redemption or damnation. Very much so in just one decision. And I love that that's on the table. And I love that that's going to be a balancing act. And I don't know which way he's going to go. Because I love being a badass and a mean bastard as Wagner, but at the same time, he has got a method to his madness. And I love the desperation of the combat. I love that we were having to be scrappy. I love that we were going to have to leave the people that we brought in there to die, to escape. And people panicking as they're trying to get out of that enclosed space, as you would. If the mighty undead arrive, they're not just D&D undead, they're holy shit, they're undead and immensely strong and don't feel pain and never stop undead. Overall, just an epic session that didn't let up at all. From intense role-playing to intense combat and then intense running away. It had everything. So yeah, it was top-notch.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I think I'll do more voice stuff. I liked it. It wasn't that complicated to set up, and that was, I don't know, 20 minutes. I think I could have like refined the voice further to like get it a bit more echoey, a little bit more creepy, but I think it worked well anyway. And I just love that now there's like this web of like lies and deceit that is like already implanted there. Everyone has to do something, just a little thing, for like unlimited power. And now the question is, will they do it? You know, it's always going to be in the background.
And will they actually get it? That's the other
Yeah.
thing. Because I'm worried it'll be one of those things that will be like,
Well, I
be
mean,
careful what you wish for kind of deal.
we don't know in character,
No.
but Lloyd has said out of character that they literally cannot lie. So
Yeah,
we will
true.
get something.
Yes.
But he's also been very clever with his setup of, if I get what I want, then that sets up Sigrid to fulfill her deal, which will be to kill me
And me too,
with
yeah.
that special dagger. So it's like, I'm sure we'll get the power and the glory, and then a very inglorious end to
It's
that.
also a question of like, they may give you the ability to become glorious, but like, what does that mean? Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that everyone's just going to like look at you and be like, oh, it might be some gross mutation. It might be like, it could be anything, you know, like it's like the tainted wish idea where like you don't phrase it carefully, you know, and the genie is like, oh, that's what you want, and then like gives you what you wanted, but in the worst way possible, kind of thing, you know. But they cannot lie. The Alpha are like bound by very specific rules. They're not allowed to lie. It's not possible for them, so they have to manipulate. They also like burn at the touch of like unforged iron and a couple of other things like that. So they have weaknesses and things like that. But
I think it was the perfect session to go into it. Like, I'm obviously you planned it this way, but I mean, you wouldn't have known that it was going to be Ragnar and Hvisla in the tomb, though, which is the thing that really gets me, because ordinarily Ragnar would have grabbed her and pushed her to the undead to buy himself time to get out. But now Ragnar found himself having to defend someone that hates him, and he hates equally back, because of that new information. And it just, I love that I had to change how I was playing him to suit that, and I was over the moon with it, man.
Yeah, I really liked that because I feel like most people, when they do these kinds of scenes, like there's kind of like an immediate transaction of, it's like, okay, here's this power now, and you do this thing now. But like this is like, at the very least, like 8 to 9 months away minimum. Like a lot of the objectives like require like births of children, which takes time. So it's very much like a setup, a seed that's going to like eventually grow, not just like, oh, here's crazy elf magic, do this thing now. It's like, it's just planted the little seeds there of like, and like really gives us time to like think and like develop. It's like Rob says, there was a very interesting development between Hvisla and Ragnar this session, which might color Ragnar's decision of whether or not he's going to carry out his task, because it is, for him, you know, maybe not a huge deal, but for Hvisla is a massive deal. Involves literally stealing her child that she is going to give birth to. Like seeing how their relationship develops over the next 9 months is really going to like determine whether or not Ragnar actually goes through with it in the end. And like having it have so much time to breathe, and for us all to like think about how terrible it's going to be when it happens, I think like is a lot better than as if it were just like an immediate trade.
It's also Arnvid's son, who was vile to Ragnar.
Yep, just the worst.
Just the worst. Ragnar's not a nice dude either, let's be honest. But that's another thing that I was thinking about today. Actually, I was like, oh shit, there's that as well.
But is it the baby's fault, you know?
Yeah, well, that's it.
Yep, moral quandaries, yay!
Moral quandaries! And I think, gents, we've just about smashed it into the ground.
I think so, yeah.
I like leaving it to almost like a fortnightly thing, because it means we get lots of we've played like a decent amount of games that we can talk about, and it's not too often that we're always asking the community for questions. So I'm liking the setup we've got at the moment. Anything further to add about anything at all? Jeff, have you? In fact, I know for a fact we were talking about Middle Earth. You've got something coming up with Middle Earth, don't you?
Yep, I'm gonna try to get a doodle out to you guys to try to get that set up soon. I'm going to be running either late this month or early mid next month a Middle Earth one-shot, level 20. So it's going to be bonkers. I've already told the players that they will basically get all of the heirloom stuff for their culture, and perhaps even more than that. And it's basically going to be set in the prophecy of Daggeroth, which is like the battle of all battles. So at the very end of time, Morgoth breaks out from his imprisonment, attempts one last-ditch effort to take back his Middle Earth, and just literally brings back all the who's who of his favorite enemies. He brings back like Gothmog, he brings back Sauron, literally all of his best generals across Middle Earth history. And the entirety of all the free people of Middle Earth, every elf, every man, every dwarf, even some of the Maiar and Valar, like basically create a huge super team to try to fight off Morgoth. So the players are going to be, it sounds like, attempting to kill Gothmog, the king of all the Balrogs. So it'll be literally insane in every way.
I'm afraid.
I'm afraid too. But it's nice because I kind of get to link it to Faroth away because I'm going to be a Narion, who is a canon character from Numenor, which I'm very excited about playing. Had you decided what you were going to be, Lloyd? You're going to be an Elven Lord?
Yes, I was going to be a non-named one, but everyone else is going for name characters, so I'm probably going to play, what's he called? Uwe, who's like the first king of the Noldor. One of the raddest of rad elf lords that ever radded. So I'm very excited to do that and just shout things in Elvish and just get real Middle Earth about it.
Anything else
Yeah,
to plug,
this is
Jeff?
one of the rare instances where basically all bets are off. For like normally in Middle Earth, like you can't play elves, you can't be the people who are like actually in the story. But this is the kind of session where I'm basically just like, whatever you guys want to do, you can just be that guy. So I'm excited to see what you guys do with it. And it's going to be Lloyd and Rob, obviously, who are here, and then Caius, who is like one of the best Middle Earth players as well. Like he's just great.
One of the best
And
players.
then,
Yeah.
and then Taylor, who was joining us earlier as well. So it's a ridiculous crew. I'm going to try to get that scheduled sometime soon so we can get that in the books because it's going to be a lot.
Yep. Tonight, myself and Jeff and Chris Wilhelm are playing in a game that Marquise is running of Blades in the Dark in like half an hour.
Half an hour.
Yep. So if you're interested in watching that, I don't know where that, maybe Marquise's channel, actually don't know if it's going to be on anybody's channel. Does Marquise have a YouTube channel?
It goes up in the air for Marquise. Sometimes he does, sometimes he'll just do it privately. So
Yeah.
that might go up. But
so that's one thing. Then this Friday, Nico is starting a campaign, a 3-shot set in mystical Japan, which hopefully I will get him to record. I've been hassling him about that. And that's all we have coming up, I think, for now.
Yeah, for now.
Lore Keepers on the 25th.
Yeah, so we have Lawkeepers not this weekend, but next. Star Wars, we're going to have to sadly reschedule, but that'll be back soon. Star Wars Knights of the Remnant episode 2 will be out.
Jade Horde on Monday as well.
Yes.
Yes, Jade Horde on Monday as well. And and then Lawkeepers, yeah. So, but definitely we'll be obviously giving updates before those games come out on the Absolutely Tabletop Facebook group. Come and join us, have a laugh. So thank you ever so much for watching, listening, and if you want to get involved, we'll be letting you know how next time we do one of these. So thanks, Lloyd. Thanks, Jeff. Thanks, Taylor. Thanks for all of you who watched. Take it easy, and I hope that all of your performances are up to standard.